Good morning, everybody. It seems that most of you are in the room yet and watching others. Thank you very much to be here and connected. We are today here to present and discuss the report of Camille about Energy Union 2.0 to deliver European Green Deal, stronger governance, common financing, and democratic tools. Thank you very much to our panelists that are from the reflection group set up by the Jacques Delors Institute to support this work. Thank you to all of you for accepting to share your view and analysis with us today. Thanks to Camille for organizing that meeting, and congratulations, Camille and the reflection group for that report and all the work that have been done for that report. I'm very delighted to moderate such a panel on such an essential topic, and to introduce that panel, I would like just to say a few words. While I was preparing that panel, I remember that in 2019, the Green Deal was a result of the EU elections, while citizens went to vote more than they have ever done in 30 years, renewing their confidence to the EU institution, but in the same time, voting with a clear mandate to the European Commission, driving Europe to carbon neutrality. And the Green Deal was the direct consequence of that vote. And I thought that as the time for the new European elections comes near, it is interesting to remember that, especially if we consider that the role of the next Commission in that field will be more important and determinant than ever, and the risk of backlash, objections, and crisis will probably be more important than ever too. But in the same time, the acceleration of climate change and the amplification of its consequences, uncertainty in our global world, and the cost of our fossil energy dependencies are factors that push to improve our resilience, and the Green Pact is part of the answer. A lot has been done, but the most has still to be done, and the 5 next years will be essential that the message delivers by this report, which proposes and recommends a way to do it. Camille, I let you explain us what may be an Energy Union 2.0 and how can we achieve it. Thank you very much. If you allow me, Camille, I remember that you are the head of the Jacques Delors Energy Center. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Sylvie. Can you all see my screen?
We do.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Sylvie, for the introduction. And again, thanks to the reflection group members that are here today with us. And I'm really excited to display this work, but also to hear more about their thoughts and their perspective on this work that has been very much collaborative. So indeed, the objective of the report was to analyze the EU response to the succession of crises that we've seen over the past 4 years, and to identify the progress and gaps in European energy and climate policy, with the view to contributing to the debate ahead of the next European elections and the next European Commission. So, as you see on this illustration, sorry, we've seen a succession of crises. We have a climate emergency to which the EU answered with the European Green Deal and the Fit for 55. And then we had an unforeseen crisis, which triggered really political breakthroughs in terms of European energy policy. We've had Next Generation EU as an answer to the pandemic. We've had Repower EU with the ambition to phase out Russian fossil fuels before 2030, as a result of the weaponization of gas and the war in Ukraine. And lastly, we now have an infancy of Green Deal industrial plan and industrial policy at the EU level as an answer to rising tensions on clean tech supply chains. So we see that there's a lot has been achieved, but is this enough? And as Sylvie was mentioning, what the report finds is that EU tools fall short of the energy union ambitions. So, for example, the European Court of Auditors in a report this year highlighted the fact that there's a high uncertainty that the Fit for 55 will be implemented with sufficient ambition at the national level by member states. This is just one example of the scale of the challenge that we're facing that actually calls for unprecedented levels of collective actions. And for that, we need to have more collective action at the European level, but also European tools that foster more coordination across national governments and local governments. We also need new type of collaborations across different types of actors, which are public, private, and civil society. And in regard to the task that we're facing, EU tools are too national. As I've mentioned, the Fit for 55 smooth and ambitious implementation will really rest on the technical, human, and financial resources of each member state, with a lot of differences in terms of implementation capacity. The Net Zero Industry Act also has a very national approach with strategic projects that will be defined by national governments with the very weak EU coordination in terms of industrial policy. The Next Generation EU, which is the strongest political breakthrough that we've seen over the past 4 years, is too temporary, although it really filled critical public investment gap in the green transition. But it will end in 2026, and nothing is really foreseen to replace it for now. EU tools are also too voluntary sometimes. So I took this example just to illustrate the REPowerEU gas and electricity demand reduction targets were voluntary. So there's a lack of also compliance mechanism with these objectives. And lastly, the tools of the European Union in terms of energy and climate policy are mostly regulatory, which is good. We have a very strong framework. However, we lack human, technical, and financial support to really foster the achievement of these objectives. And so when I say the energy union objectives are under threat, I wanted to recall what are the objectives? Well, sustainability, which is now climate neutrality and achieving the European Green Deal. It is under threat because we need to triple the emission reduction rate by 2030 compared to past historical trends. And this requires an ambitious implementation of the Fit for 55 and more broadly because of the EU Green Deal, which is much more than the Fit for 55. Another objective of the Energy Union is to achieve energy security, and now we see still high dependency on imported fossil fuels, but also vulnerability to weaponization of clean tech supply chains, as we see, especially with regard to China. And on these two dimensions, fossil fuels and clean techs, we see a lack of European coordination in terms of strategic gas reserves, but also truly European approach to green industrial policy. And then price, which is the third objective of the Energy Union, to foster competitiveness, but also affordability for households. And now we see that we are facing a structural lack of competitiveness for businesses. And the problem is that to achieve climate neutrality and a more secure energy supply, we need to do the transition, which entails high investment costs, which will bring to the fore inequalities in terms of access to finance and also capacity in terms of implementation. So that it has strong distributional issues, which is linked to rising social and political acceptability challenges linked to the transition. And I wanted to illustrate two of these aspects. So the first one is the lack of competitiveness of EU industries. So retail electricity prices paid by industrial customers in the EU were twice above our main trading partners during the crisis, it is mostly likely to have receded a bit, but it remains higher. And on the right side of this slide, you can also see the Chinese domination over the global production for clean tech components. This is just an illustration because on different stages of supply chains, such as critical raw materials and refining and extraction, China also dominates, and other actors, very single actors dominate these steps of the supply chain. So there's a high vulnerability. And the recommendation of this report, as highlighted already by Sylvie, is to strengthen the energy union tools with adequate funding, reformed governance that would be more agile and more collaborative, and strengthen instruments for participatory democracy. So we have also specific recommendations touching upon all these aspects, and I will now dive into them. So we need additional funding. We are facing a very challenging context for both private and public investments. Private investment is really not favored by high ECB, European Central Bank rates, but also high energy costs and the lack of skilled workforce, as highlighted by the European Investment Bank. Public investment is also under threat because we've spent a lot in subsidizing the impact of energy bills in response to the energy crisis. On the other hand, we have new needs. We have the need for greater resilience. We have also the need to increase economic and energy security, which will come with a cost. And so common funding would also foster joint action. We've seen some unity against Russia, but not as ambitious as we could have expected. For example, we didn't manage to agree on an embargo on Russian gas, which actually led to an increase in imports of Russian LNG this year. And this could be also attributed, among other factors, by the fact that we didn't have a compensation mechanism for the member states that would have been more impacted by this embargo. So we see that solidarity, financial solidarity, could also foster a stronger EU stance on the external, for our external relations. There's this question of, can we also be united against other major blocs? Can we answer the US IRA? And can we answer also the very aggressive industrial policy that China is currently conducting? We also need to secure broad political support for the transition. And one of the key aspects of securing broad political support is really to share risks and costs, as well as the benefits. And joint funding could actually support that. And it has been also highlighted with the Next Generation EU, which has strong solidarity features. And this also comes to the last point, is also to avoid market fragmentation. In response to the energy price crisis, we've seen mostly national answers and increasing inequalities between member states that do not always have the same possibility in terms of subsidizing their businesses or households' energy bills. Security and competitiveness and climate security, climate neutrality, can be considered as European public goods. And we see also calls for more public funding to support this. The analysis of Jean Pisani-Ferry and Selma Mahfouz in France showed that we need to mobilize other funding resources to deliver the transition in France. They also highlighted that we might need new taxes and new debt. It would make much more sense to have this at the European level, as Mario Draghi is currently calling for, to address the major challenges that we're facing that are not only about energy, but also but energy is a big part of that. And we've seen in this year calls for more funding from many think tanks in the European Union, from I4C in France to Bruegel in Brussels, or Agora and Agivende, or our colleagues from the Dollar Center in Berlin. The European Central Bank staff is also working on such a policy option. So it is quite uncontroversial, actually, to say, well, we need to have more funding because we have more needs. This is why the report also advocates for a clean investment plan with a sovereign funds that would finance pan-European support schemes for clean techs and grids, as well as an EU agency for green R&D on cutting-edge new techs. For example, how to have more resource-efficient batteries or things like this. But more funding will not solve the equation if we don't have a better governance framework, more agile, more collaborative, and also more able to operate under a high uncertainty. So we need to improve the absorption and the quality of spending of at the EU and local and national level. And we also need to find solutions in the context of uncertainty. We've seen this past 4 years how uncertain how our world can be. The climate is going to change, so this is a major thing that we don't know how far it is going to change and what are going to be the impacts. It's really hard to predict, so we need governance that can adapt to shocks. And for that, one of the options that is pushed forward by the report is interactive governance models inspired by the US Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, so the US DARPA, that gave birth to Internet. And so that really is interesting because it sets general objectives at a higher level. Let's say, let's find Internet. And then they set a joint multi-stakeholder governance system to oversee the progress. We can see that in the EU, we have the first one, so setting general objective at a high level, but we maybe lacking the space for collaboration and collective learning that can be successful in achieving very ambitious goals as we have in the EU in terms of climate neutrality, energy security, and competitiveness. So there's an interesting potential for replication on existing EU energy and climate policy tools, for example, the social climate plans that need to be drafted to access the social climate fund, or NECPs that are currently under review. To support that goal, European Energy Agency would be very important, and I think Jean-Michel here also supported that call with Bruegel. So the European Energy Agency would actually fill the knowledge gap that we have by providing up-to-date data on energy issues that is currently lacking and hindering a quality assessment of the situation and policy evaluation that would be key if we want to make sure we are not wasting time on bad solutions. Such a governance would also give birth to a new European energy security strategy that would really be based on manufacturing clean infrastructure such as grids, but also demand reduction. So renovation, for example, can really save grid deployment costs and sufficiency, of course. And one of the things that could be instrumental and that Commission could launch for the next Commission would be a facility to support the creation and establishment of energy and climate stakeholder platforms for dialogue among stakeholders at the national level to discuss Fit for 55 implementation and ensure it can be ambitious, and also to discuss potential avenues for well-designed future European policies. The last pillar of the recommendation is the democratic tools that we need, because we see a broad consensus on the need to, increase funding, or at least to increase it on certain areas, the need to have a better governance and have a common strategy. The problem is that there's a major political challenge in getting these tools, and there's an increasing gap between citizens' expectations, green businesses' expectations and advocacy, analyst recommendations, and the ambition of current policies, and especially future policies. As we see, the political space is really shrinking at the European level. Just as an example, this graph shows the share of sufficiency measures that resulted from discussions held in citizen assemblies in some countries compared to their national energy and climate plans. So you can see there's a much more acceptance for sufficiency measures among citizens when given the space to have this discussion about that with experts and also discuss it among themselves. And so a citizen assembly, this recommendation is also to contribute to the debate on what kind of energy union tools we need. Making the debate more fact-based and balanced could also be supported by the European Energy Agency and more stakeholders dialogue to also support new and expanded public, private, and civil society partnerships, but also make visible the support for the transition and the kind of tools that could be widely accepted. As a conclusion, so how to get there, I just wanted to recall the latest figures of the European Investment Bank Climate Survey that show high citizen expectations on ambitious and fair climate action, and actually willingness to increase taxes to fund this transition. I also wanted to quote Philippe Aghion in Bruegel's latest ebook called Sparking Europe's New Industrial Revolution, where he says basically without a change of rules and doctrine, Europe runs the risk of an irreversible decline. I think these are strong words that are not used without without caution, but this also shows the kind of debate that is ongoing currently among experts, and I think this should really be much more visible. So basically, as a conclusion, we need new tools. We already have excellent foundation for European energy and climate policy, but we need more coordination and collective action to face the political, geopolitical, social, and economic risks that we are facing now. And the Energy Union 2.0 is not about like throwing everything out of from the window. It's really about incremental improvements of existing policies based on complementary political governance and financing proposals. So I think we'll have some time for a few questions if there is before turning to the panel, and I'm really excited to hear about our reflection group members and thanking them one more time for their excellent contributions to this work. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Camille. I don't have any questions for you yet. Then I propose to begin our discussion and to let the people, the panel speak and present their ideas. And after, if we have any questions that come within that discussion, then I will ask you. Is it okay for you, Camille?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Then, thank you very much to Mr. Gilles Tract, who joined us during your speech, Camille. You are chief economist at the DG NR, in the European Commission, and I will ask you a first question. We heard Camille. She had explained us at the beginning of her speech that the scale of the challenge calls for an unprecedented levels of collective action, and she has finished the presentation asking us how to get there. Then I would like to ask you, what are the lessons learned from these first years of the Green Pact, but also from the energy crisis these last years?
Okay, so many thanks for having me invited to this seminar. I think it's a great opportunity now, precisely to take stock on these first years of the green transition, when the green transition is actually becoming a reality. And I think that this is a very, very important point on my side. I mean, it's not the same to ask for a doubling of renewables when you move from 10% to 20%, from the changes that we are considering now for the overall, for instance, the power system. I mean, if we need to increase the number of renewables and absorb more and more renewables into the system, will fundamentally change how electricity is remunerated, but also there needs to be a parallel move in solutions like demand flexibility, storages, batteries, and so on. I mean, we are moving into a very big electrification of the economy, and as Camille says, I mean, this requires collective action. I mean, collective action at all different levels of the public sector, but also from the private sector very much. I mean, ourselves, we are now working on the modeling of the exercise for the 2040 greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, I mean, the investment needs that we are considering for the economy are huge in a context where we have tight public budgets, also tightness in the European budget, and in any case, I mean, the mobilization of private capital will be key, for all this to happen. Now, in terms of lessons learned, I mean, I think that the transition is advancing well, and it is advancing well. And I make here also the link, with the recent energy crisis, because I mean, renewables. It's not only that they are good for the planet, but they are also good for affordability. I mean, those member states that had a higher share of renewables into the system, they were able to weather the storm. Sorry, of the crisis better, but they're also good for our security of supply. So I think that this is, a good, let's say, a good description of how this is seen. At the same time, I have to say that the transition is happening in those areas that are cost efficient. So, I mean, we have a lot of solar panels, and I mean, we had 56 gigawatt last year of renewable energy sources deployed in the EU. This year, we will, in 2023, we will probably have an even higher number. But this is because there is a market. I mean, the support for these renewables, let's say not all these deployment in renewables, they need public support. So there is a market for it. There are other parts of the economy that will be much harder to decarbonize. And I'm talking about agriculture, buildings, transport, and so on. And I think that we need, in the future, to come with the most cost-efficient pathways to deliver on this decarbonization. It will not be possible, probably with the resources that we have, to do all at once. Now, in terms of the lessons, of the crisis, I think, I mean, one obvious lesson is that dependency on, on specific suppliers for fossil fuels might make, the transition very difficult, because, these dependencies, they can bring, to significant price increases if there are mismatches between supply and demand. And if we have, an uncertainty, during the transition, this will increase the cost of this transition very much via higher cost of capital, and others. And the final point again is to stress this, the need for a good system integration. I mean, we cannot just simply build more renewables. We need to adapt the whole system to this, to this new reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You told us that green transition is a reality, and that's true. But the energy crisis increases strongly the price of energy, but not only. And it shows us how difficult may be that transition for some people, and some part of the population.
Yes, but we need to. Sorry,
yeah.
please.
Sorry, yeah.
No.
My question will give you the opportunity to answer, because I wanted to ask you, how can we articulate current energy transition while preserving socially acceptable prices?
I think, I mean, we need to be clear. The prices increased in 2022 because of Russia manipulation of the market. They did not increase because of renewables. They did not increase because of the green transition. Quite on the contrary. So if you look at, the prices in Italy and Sweden, Italy much more dependent on fossil fuels, they had a higher impact. So I think we need to be clear, on this narrative. It's not the green transition that increases the prices. Actually, and this is, part of the work that we are doing with the electricity market design, it should provide, much more certainty, in terms of, with PPAs, CFDs, on those prices. Now, on the social acceptability, I think that this is a very important point, but it touches, on a story that for me is about, CapEx and OpEx, in a sense. We have very high capital expenditure during the transition, because, I mean, you want to renovate your house, it has, a cost, this house renovation, or you want to install a heat pump, it has a cost, or you want to buy an electric car, it has a cost. But the operating costs, are expected to be much lower. So it's a question of making attractive, this upfront investment in a way that the benefits over time can come to the citizen. But there is, I think a narrative out there that let's say the introduction of renewables might increase prices. It's not at all true, because I mean the cost of generation of renewables is much is much lower, even when taking into account the intermittency, batteries and so on. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that precision. And I didn't want to say that it was the energy transition that increased prices, it was the war. But in reality, we know that the green transition will have consequences on prices and will affect the revenue of people, and mostly of people that have not enough means to invest and to protect themselves from the consequences of climate change, and also for the consequences of energy transition. That maybe, and that will be my last question before asking questions to other panelists. What are for you the challenges to improve access to energy data? And to better understand what will be the energy transition challenges, and how can we support that energy transition?
Was the question directed to me?
Yeah.
Sorry. I thought it was for another panel member. Apologies. No, I think one of the lessons again learned from the from the crisis is the fact that we need to have more up-to-date, interoperable, granular, and rich data than we had in the past. I mean, with the changes that we are seeing in the energy sector, it is clear that, and I give you one example. I mean, the data on natural gas, published by Eurostat, I mean, it has a 1-year time lag. Obviously, when we were doing the emergency legislation during the crisis, we didn't have the luxury to wait for 1 year of data to try to make up our minds. So we rely a lot on on market data on our side, but there is a variety of bodies now existing in the EU that publish data. I mean, we have Eurostat, but we also have Acer, we have ESMA for securities, financial financial markets for energy. We have also the data that the TSOs publish. We have data from companies and so on. And ourselves, I mean, we have been working quite a lot on an initiative, at least my team, to improve up-to-date data and the quality of energy data, meeting with the key stakeholders and trying to define, I mean, what are, let's say, the main challenges and the quick gains we can get from making the data, which sometimes is not published in a in a friendly way, to make it easily accessible on the websites with definitions that are comparable, and so on. And on the long term, I think it is important that we improve the reporting on emerging technologies. I mean, on a lot of technologies we don't have let's say, the quality and the consistent data, and that we reconcile, the different methodologies. I mean, in the US, they have an agency that publishes, very, up-to-date data in a very rich and friendly way. And I think what we should learn, from their experience.
Thank you very much. Jean-Michel Glachon, you are professor at the Florence School of Regulation, and as a specialist of the electricity market design, may I ask you, what are the tools that the EU needs to achieve very ambitious targets?
To be frank, the key tools are not necessarily the market design. The market design is the way we will use how market works. But in electricity, the market is splitted into, let's call them baskets. So we have a market to do this, a market to do that, another market to do something else, and a fourth market to do again something else. And we have many of them. How many? It does not matter. So take an example. Renewable investments, they are not coming from electricity demand. They are not coming from electricity calls. That's totally the opposite. Renewable investments are pushed by decision being taken. Take now the grids. We need grids. Without grids, we cannot do much. Look in the Netherlands. The Netherlands grids are saying electricity grids. They are saying, we are sorry, we are sorry, we are congested, we are congested. 70%, 80% of our grids are congested. And in the coming years, it can go up to 90, 100%. It's not coming from the demand because demand is asking for something. It's coming from the delay. We need 10 years, 15 years to have a national plan of grids. And in the Netherlands, being a beautiful country, very heavily populated, the few places being natural are protected, which is correct, normal. But as they are protected, how can we expand the grids? We cannot, because the courts will say no when people will ask the court to block grid expansion. And take something else. In the North Sea, we have fantastic programs for wind expansion, which is very good. So you have from the French to Norway, being EU-friendly, if not inside, we have fantastic plans to invest. Okay, and then to evacuate this power. We are not yet arrived to the point where we will have a comprehensive North Europe plan to fully evacuate the wind power. And even if we evacuate this wind power, where? Do we stop in Germany? Do we go to Austria? Do we go to Czech Republic? Where will we stop? So I'm not entering into the details of the market design reform because roughly, I think that Commission was good at pushing market design in new areas. We can say, for example, flexibility. Another part, protecting more consumers. Miguel was just saying that's very strange. Cost of renewable are known, and they are not moving much from one year to the next. So we should find ways of transmitting this price stability to the consumers. And the market design reform is offering ways of doing it. We can also have stability being regionalized. We may think that a bunch of countries will have a common mechanism to stabilize prices, and it's also in the reform. So the reform is doing many things regarding market design, but there is many other things outside the market design. For example, what we call capacity mechanisms. We need certain assets to protect the electricity system, not to feed energy when everything is quiet, everything goes normally, but in certain situations being more difficult. So these particular assets are provided by capacity mechanism. Again, it's a public decision, but it's a public decision mainly taken by one state in isolation, another state is doing something else, a third state again something else. We should look at all of this together because we will need these assets when we will have crisis or tensions. So I was telling you that, unfortunately, the existing market design reform, which is good, will not solve many key issues because they are coming from outside the electricity market design. That's my answer to your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that answer. You talk about flexibility, stability, capacity, mechanism, protection, but you regret that there is no more cooperation between us and no more we don't work more together. Then perhaps my next question will be, how can we better include grids, infrastructure, and demand-side management consideration into the EU energy policy?
Ooh. First, we had a lot of cooperation between us last year. Many of us were thinking EU will break. EU did not break. We will get chaos. We didn't get chaos. Even in December 2020, France has been fully rescued by Germany for power. Fully, all our needs. So it's not true that we do not cooperate. We cooperate in the existing frame. Things being not in the existing frame are not. And grids, adaptation to acceleration of renewables, acceleration of decarbonation, grids have not received the corresponding frame, the corresponding tools and governance. We do not. Even for grids, we cooperate, we discuss. Even if you look at the way the TSOs, the transmission companies, the DSOs, the distribution companies cooperate, they cooperate by discussing. We may call it bottom up. You start from the companies, you go up, you go up, you go up, you go up. At the end, you arrive in Europe. But given the high level of the issues we are facing, we should have the opposite, starting from the highest level and going down to countries to see how countries could contribute to the common threats we face together. This top-down do not exist, is not supported. From time to time, somebody is calling for. I will take an example. The Belgian transmission system operator, Elia, while being a private company, is saying repeatedly, we won't make it, because we do not have enough European deep cooperation. So there is people fully understanding the issue, but the tools are not there, the practice are not there yet, and the national support is, say, limited for the moment. I can take another example because this one is funny. Spain considers that France will build a link between Spain hydrogen production and Germany hydrogen consumption. Yes, but this link is not really in the French investment program. It is in the French investment speeches, but not program. It is not program. It's a typical case of this difficulty. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you very much. You remember us that many cooperation when achieved in Europe when we are in front of crisis. We talk about chaos. Maybe a last question for you. What may be your recommendations for the next European Commission?
Ooh. Fortunately, I'm very close from Camille. So, except France School is not doing political recommendation. So, democracy of Europe, etc., is an issue for Jacques Delors, but at France School we do not discuss it. But all the other things we look at, and we have very, very similar views. For example, we are fully convinced that we need a security strategy. And the security strategy in the past, by the way, in 2010, the Jacques Delors Institute already published a recommendation to have a common security strategy vis-à-vis gas supply, and nobody took care, nobody even discussed it. But let's forget it. But all the gas crisis we are facing since last year was foreseen and not prepared, but was fully taken into account in this report in 2010. And Mark van der Woede, and one of the three authors of the 2010 publication of the Jacques Delors Institute, is nothing less than the head of the European Court of Justice. So it's to tell you how serious this report was. So now we need a security strategy, but a new one, because our security strategy is security strategy of decarbonization. And decarbonization, we need, as Miguel said, a lot of investments being capital intensive, so a lot of technology, manufacturing capability, human capability. We have to prepare this. It won't fall from the sky. Second, we need an investment plan, because we use in Europe to have targets and the countries do what they want. Fine. But if we are in an emergency, it would be better to have countries doing what they should and EU doing its own part. So we should have an investment plan at the EU level and a funding at the EU level. Third, national plans, the famous National Energy and Climate Plan. Again, if there is no emergency, that's fine to have national plans and, okay, a country says, I will do this, and do they do, we will see later. Nobody will die because of this. In an emergency, it's not the case anymore. So we should track how the plans are fulfilled, implemented by the countries with indicators. We should help countries to understand what they do. To be frank, many countries do not understand it. So a big part of this upscale has to come from, for example, digital reform, training people of national administration, of JRC, helping national administration to understand the options, the feasibility, and even ESSER sharing its knowledge. Third, I agree with Miguel that we lack too much EU data and also EU knowledge. We have to accumulate in Europe much more information relevant to decision making and people understanding these things. It can be ESSER, it can be ESSER plus GRC, it can be ESSER and GRC with people from the GNR. There is many possibilities, but we need to upscale it, because if you reread Repo EU from last year, you see that people writing it, they did their best, but their best was a bit fuzzy, let's say, by lack of immediately available information or knowledge. And to end, a fifth idea, we have many tools in Europe, because as soon as we have an issue, we create a new tool, fine. But at the end, we have 12 tools, nobody is doing the following up, and few people understand how they complement each other or how they link. So we have to rethink it. And I see that even Camille said that at the Secretary General, we should have a new task force. That's the way I see it. We issued a more detailed recommendation at France School, but I said enough.
Thank you very much, Jean-Michel, for your really operational plan for the next commission. I think it may be useful. I don't know if you remember, but one of the objective of the Jacques Delors Institute at its creation, and the ambition of Jacques Delors when he decided to create the institute, was to promote a common European community, a European energy community. And no one wanted to even talk about that and think about that. It was 30 years before. And
an anecdote. I will finish by an anecdote. Jacques Delors was advisor of the French Prime Minister 47 years ago. And he said to the Prime Minister, you should think trading the future human resources in France, because we will need much more people to employ. So he permitted employees to go to university half a day a week. One of them was called Jean-Michel Glachan, and thanks to this, was able to get a master, a thesis, to become a lecturer, and then a professor. So I am a guy coming from Jacques Delors' practical reformist views to push things in Europe, and we have many things to push still today.
Clearly, and thank you for this anecdote. Heather Grab, you are senior fellow at the Bruegel Institute. You've worked you worked a long time on how to maintain democratic consent for a fair transition. May I ask you, what are the key findings and tools to ensure that?
Well, I think there are several tools to ensure democratic consent. And for the energy transition in particular, we need to pay a lot of attention to two of them. One is accurate information to people about the energy choices that they have now and in the future. And the second one is helping to have a more interactive energy policy and energy security process of dialogue with citizens. So on the first one, the accurate information is often listening. I mean, even just this morning, Sylvie, you were saying, oh, well, we need to think about prices and how much society might be damaged by high energy prices. But in fact, the high energy prices are, as Jean-Michel just pointed out, because of Vladimir Putin. We should be very clear about that. The reason why energy has become unaffordable for so many Europeans over the past 18 months is because of Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. It is not because of renewable energies. And in fact, once renewable energy is a much larger proportion, ideally all of our energy mix in the future, energy prices will drop dramatically, because the cost of renewables to produce electricity for daily use is extremely low, far lower than fossil fuels. What we have at the moment is a completely distorted energy market, whereby fossil fuels are subsidized by governments. This year, the European Union will spend billions, EU governments will spend billions on subsidizing fossil fuels, when in fact, they are something that keeps us dependent on imports. We have to have a continuous flow of fossil fuels, which is both expensive, enormously expensive for an energy poor continent like Europe, where we have few sources of our own, and also which keeps continuing the carbon emissions and all of the air pollution and the other problems that cause Europeans to suffer. Whereas renewables in the future will be very cheap. And of course, that creates an economic problem, as Jean-Michel and Miguel were pointing out earlier, because of course, the investments in renewables are not going to be driven by the prospect of high prices, high revenues in the future. They do have to be driven by regulation because of and by the prospects of fossil fuels being phased out, in order to create the incentives for private sector investment in grid upgrades, as Jean-Michel was saying, in ensuring interconnectors between the member states, as Miguel was saying, and so on. So this is a policy conundrum. It's not because consumers are going to face high energy prices from renewables, quite the opposite. So there needs to be accurate information about the energy transition. But then there also has to be much more help for making that transition happen. Now, I've been involved in a project with Open Society Foundations and also the King Baudouin Foundation here in Belgium, IKEA Foundation, and a number of others on the fair energy transition. And it complements what Camille was saying in her initial presentation, based on the EIB and other data, about the experiences of Europeans, that in fact, European citizens and indeed people elsewhere in the world are very willing to reduce their energy consumption. And of course, many have done so in response both to higher prices and also because of the fact that they understand perfectly well that fossil fuel energy is creating carbon emissions. As Camille said to us at the beginning of this event today, sufficiency measures, what you call in French sobriété, so energy efficiency, is supported largely by European citizens. There's a high degree of support. People would like to do more to reduce their consumption of fossil fuels. The problem is many of them do not have the power to control their own energy consumption because of infrastructure. So, for example, and this definitely applies to the poorest, to the most vulnerable in our societies. They are often the ones with the least control and the least agency over their energy choices, because they may live in a building where the landlord is entirely responsible for the infrastructure, so they can't install, maybe they can't afford to install insulation, but they don't have any control over the source of the energy. They often don't have control over their own consumption, because the landlord may simply take the energy bill and of the whole building and divide it up by the tenants, or they may be on a meter, where they have to pay as you go for energy, which is very expensive and inequitable. So giving people agency in their own energy choices and allowing them to show their support for energy efficiency would be something very important to do. And I think we need more attention to that, as well as more social support for people in meeting their energy bills, which is not about subsidizing consumption of fossil fuels, which tends to benefit more the middle classes who consume more of them, for example, because they tend to drive larger vehicles and because they tend not to use public transport so much, as well as having, of course, much smaller dwellings, so they use less for their home heating. But there needs to be direct support to households. And I think that's the part that's really been missing in the policy mix. This is not in the control of the EU, of the Commission, because the funds that are available, for example, in the Just Transition Fund, are pretty small. This is mostly national governments, but national governments need to move the subsidies from fossil fuel consumption to targeted support to households for energy consumption, which is a different set of policy measures. But I also would like to address the question of how to adapt the whole system and how to make that fair and maintain the democratic consent for it, because we do have this complicated kind of catch-22, whereby we need to upgrade the grid now to build the interconnectors, but how do we share the costs and risks in ways that bring in private sector investment for the benefit of all European consumers? And how do we overcome the kinds of political blockages that have, for example, stopped the building of an interconnector between France and Spain across the Pyrenees for decades now? Now, this is where we do need EU policy, and we need very clear measures taken at EU level to push the energy transition along. And that's where this report from the Jacques Delors Institute is really valuable in thinking through how to get through these policy conundrums and to unlock the private sector investment that will also be needed. And finally, I just would like to address one other key element of the report, which Camille set out, which is being realistic about clean tech. We are very dependent on supplies of solar panels and batteries, and also, of course, increasingly, unfortunately, wind equipment for wind power from China, from a single source. Now, that creates a strategic dependency. And at the moment, we're very focused on the risks of that being weaponized, of it being intentionally used against us. But actually, there are plenty of reasons why there are too many risks inherent in having just one supply chain for these vital decarbonization goods. That supply chain could be disrupted by a number of reasons that are nothing to do with decisions taken in Beijing. There can be floods or fires resulting from climate change in China itself. There can also be disruption of things like COVID, which of course disrupted production a lot in the past few years. It's not good to have only one supply chain. And I think the way to answer this dependency is not to try to cut off supplies from China. It wouldn't be good to disrupt the trade. The whole world needs these decarbonization goods because everybody needs to decarbonize. But it would make sense for Europe to work with other economies around the world to establish a supplementary supply chain and have alternative sources of clean tech goods, especially ones that rely on different raw materials from those the sources that are controlled by China. So think about the way in which Europe could encourage innovation in technology. Another key point that Camille made, the idea of having a European ARPA and a European Advanced Research Projects Agency like the US one, that would help a lot to increase our technological diversification, not just the geographical diversification of sources of clean tech, but also technological diversification. For example, batteries made with sodium rather than lithium or phosphorus. For example, solar panels which have a reduced use of silver, which will be in short supply. So there are plenty of ways in which European innovation could make a difference. And I think that's a better route to go down.
Thank you very much, Heather. Do you have concrete example about green tech partnership that can help to reduce the dependence on China? And do we have yet such partnerships?
No, this doesn't exist yet. There have been attempts to create, for example, a raw materials club on the part of the Commission. Miguel would be able to tell us more about that. And also a number of attempts by member states of the EU to do bilateral deals with resource-rich countries in order to get critical materials. This is not a great way to proceed, in my view, because basically it means member states end up competing against each other for supplies, which doesn't contribute to Europe's overall energy security. I think it's better to try to use international cooperation to build a clean tech supply chain. And we put out a fair amount of detail on this in a recent paper published by Bruegel called De-risking while decarbonizing. So you can find that on the Bruegel website. But the idea behind it is it's a kind of like the climate clubs that have been put forward under the G7, under the German and Japanese presidency of the G7, but more open and inclusive, not just G7 countries and not only about measurements and standards, but also about actual clear policy direction that would help to bring in the companies that would need to actually make this supply chain.
Thanks. You've recently joined Bruegel to work on how to bring resource efficiency and environmental externalities into economic system in Europe. Maybe my last question will be, what are the priority focus areas in your opinion?
Well, there are many of them, and I think that this report sets them out very clearly. There are a lot of things that need to be done, or it's everything everywhere all at once that we need to do in the transition. And I think this is the key point, that by now climate policy is not just one policy among many. It needs to be there in every single policy the EU has, every public policy, because it's going to affect everything. It really does change everything. And the energy transition is the first step, because the energy sector as a whole, how we fuel everything that we do, is the most easily tackleable way of reducing emissions. It's getting fossil fuel out of the economy. It would be a huge achievement, and that's really what will bring us more stability in terms of temperatures, weather, and all kinds of other disasters that will otherwise be just simply getting worse each year. The problem we have now is that the energy transition, it's a business opportunity, but it also requires a lot of clear direction from policy in order to bring the investment in, as we've been discussing, but also to show people signal clearly, it's not just companies that have to invest, it's individuals. So people have to make a big upfront investment in the heating system of their home or insulation of their roof or buying an electric vehicle. And I think we need better thinking about the transition there. Now, France has done an interesting thing of providing, for example, credits for electric vehicles, which make it easier for people to spread out the upfront cost of that investment. I think we need a lot more of this because it's very hard for households, particularly on lower incomes, to come up with money, a large amount of money immediately to make that investment, even though over time, of course, all of that money will come back to them. They will save so much on their energy bills, both for transport and for heating over time, but they don't have the ready cash and they can't necessarily get a credit from the bank to do it. So having government schemes to provide the credit that households need is really vital to make this transition happen. And then we will also need to move on from energy into other areas. Miguel mentioned earlier agriculture, which accounts for 1/3 of our emissions in Europe. We have got to tackle that in the next term of the EU institutions. That's also going to be difficult politically. And here too, governments need to give very clear signals about why reducing agricultural emissions is not only good for the climate, but it will bring us better food security because more regenerative and sustainable farming will also keep the soil fertile for future generations and prevent pollution of water sources, nitrates in the soil, and improve human health. These are key messages that need to come out. And Camille mentioned earlier the importance of deliberative means of engagement with the public, because once, and this is very clear from a wide range of deliberative exercises of climate assemblies of all kinds, when people understand the complexities of the transition better and they're able to give feedback on what policy measures would they support and would also be compatible with the constraints on their own lives, then they are actually very supportive of them. And the problem we have at the moment is too many governments imposing measures without really explaining them properly and without taking into account feedback they could easily have got from deliberative processes. So we need to have deeper democracy rather than less democracy to proceed and to maintain consent from the public.
Thanks a lot, Isa. In the recommendation proposed by Jean-Michel for the next European Commission, the first point was about a new security strategy for decarbonization. Then Matusz Mishik, you are associate professor at the Comenius University in Bratislava, and you have conducted a lot of work on the EU energy policy from the perspective of Central and Eastern European member states. Can you tell us more about what do we need for a common energy security in Europe?
Thank you very much, and I would just like to start by thanking for having me today, and also congratulating to Camille because the report is really incredible, very detailed, and so I think that the Europe recently, and I will be talking mostly about natural gas because that's the area of my interest. I think Europe has been for some time in a need of a common approach of kind of trying to do things in the in the natural gas area together, because what we have seen before, and we have seen this more in Central and Eastern Europe than in Western Europe, or the situation was a little bit different in Western Europe, was that our main gas supplier, Russian Federation, was playing the field, was doing this rule and divide game for some time, and the very visible. I mean, this game or display was about that they used energy as a weapon. That's the common term these days, but it wasn't so commonly used before. And it was materialized in a way that Russia would approach its customers in Europe. So, for example, the customers that were playing according to what Russia would like to see were getting better better prices for natural gas, and the countries that were not playing the way Russia liked, they were getting different prices. And the logic, and this was the logic. So, for example, Lithuania at one point around 2014, 2013 was paying almost double for gas. This was the highest price in 2010-ish, beginning of 2010-ish from all within the whole European Union. And Lithuania is very close to Russia, so the transmission fees were not supposed to be that high, and Germany was paying one of the lowest prices, if not the lowest. The prices were kind of murky. We didn't really have the real numbers. We had, I mean, the public had only approximate numbers from various sources, and Germany was paying one of the lowest prices. But the logic of how gas market works would say that the country is so far away from the source of energy, so source of natural gas, should be paying more because the transmission fees are there, right? And you have to bring the gas those 2,000, 3,000 kilometers more. But this was not really the case. But Lithuania, which has chosen the third type of unbundling, meaning that they were trying to make sure that individual parts of natural gas delivery system would not be very closely connected, and that each company would be responsible for various activities, and there would be no interlinkage, which was not very beneficial for Russia. They were paying the most because of this decision, for many decisions, but also for this decision to kind of not play the Russian game. And Germany, which was very friendly at the time and started to already build support to build or build together with Russia Nord Stream 1 pipeline at the time, was getting really nice price, which was very very good for the German economy, but not so good for the rest, especially for Central and Eastern Europe. Many countries in Europe didn't really deal with this because it was not problem for them because of very low amount of gas coming from Russia to them, or many other reasons. So this would the Europe was in a very paradoxical situation. Around 2015, 2016, a sum of 400 billion euros a year was often used, especially by Maroš Šefčovič, as a number or as a amount of money that is being paid to foreign suppliers for energy that is being imported to the EU. So European Union was paying 400 billion euros a year for energy, but it was unable to translate this huge economic power into a better negotiation position. So I think that's what the EU needs, and I think that's what one of the main conclusions of the report as well, that we need to kind of translate this economic strength into negotiation strength. And the European Union started to do it recently with the common purchase of gas, but for now the amounts are very small. And I think it's kind of it's difficult to investigate this into more detail, but the most the reason that was most usually mentioned why this is difficult to unite the position was that just some countries were better off than others. So the countries that were in better situation, like Germany, were not really very welcoming the idea that all of a sudden they will pay more for gas because they will have to pay the same amount of everybody else, and it will be somewhere higher than they used to pay before. So I think this is the main reason why the EU should buy gas together. There are many problems, of course. There are so many problems how to do this technically, because it goes against the logic of internal energy market to a certain degree. But I think that we have seen there is already a method how to do this. So the question now is whether the EU will increase the amount that is buying together or will or will not change the situation that much. Thank you.
Thank you, Matusz. May I ask you, what was the consequences of the energy crisis for Central and Eastern European member states, and what is the perception of people in that countries about climate change, Green Pact, and the perspective to advance and to find new ways to go to the carbon neutrality?
So the current energy crisis was not that difficult for countries of Central and Eastern Europe, as was the previous one in 2009. There was a crisis during which at least two countries, Slovakia and Bulgaria, didn't have access to any gas for a couple of weeks, not only days. So this was, and other countries had also big problems because Russia was, for many of them, not only the main supplier, but the only supplier. And in Slovakia and Bulgarian case, it was the only and the main. So no access to alternative suppliers. So since then, there was a big process of improving infrastructure. And here, I think I'm echoing my previous speakers about the need of infrastructure and developing on infrastructure. So the infrastructure was much better developed now, or in 2021-22, when another energy crisis arrived. So there was already experience with alternative supplies, with alternative suppliers. There were new LNG terminals already built. So all of a sudden, Central and Eastern Europe and also the landlocked countries like Slovakia, Czech Republic, have access. Hungary have access, or Hungary is a special case, have access to LNG, which is very, very, very good for them, and also for the price signals that are happening within these markets. Central and Eastern Europe is definitely not a homogeneous group. I would say that energy security is priority for them, mostly because of this past experience. Other thing is that they are not really willing to pay for their energy security. All the infrastructure development happened with the help of the EU money since 2009. They were a project of common interest, and before that there was a European Energy Program for recovery after 2008, 9, 10 economic crisis. So all countries except of Lithuania, they used only EU money, or EU money plus their own money, but never 100% of their own money to develop new infrastructure. In Lithuanian case is a little bit different. They were struggling with Russian supplies for such a long time that at one point in 2014 they decided that they will develop their own LNG terminal for their own money. They didn't have access to EU money because the condition was at the time, and still is, that project financed by EU money has to have a regional impact, and the Baltic states were not really able to find a common position on this project. So then Lithuania decided to build this LNG terminal from their own money. But the rest of the Central Europe, they always kind of waited for EU money to build infrastructure. So this is the highest priority, and then climate issues have secondary priority. And the discussion in Central Europe often kind of mirrors the one on the global scale, where the countries of global South are saying that the rich countries of global North are supposed to lead the way, lead the decarbonization, because they are the rich ones. So this is something that we see also in Central Europe, that many countries, including Poland is very vocal on this, are saying that we still need our cheap fossil fuel to bring our economies where yours is. So give us the opportunity that you had in the past to kind of speed up or use cheap economy to improve our cheap energy to improve our economy.
Thank you, Matusz. Miguel, I've seen that you wanted to add something or to say something, and I would be really interested too if you can tell us more about the common gas purchase, and also about the raw material club.
Okay, so on the gas purchasing, I mean, actually we had the fourth round results yesterday. So I think it's a very, very significant, political message during the crisis that member states were willing to take these steps. So, I mean, sometimes, we look at it a bit in a very, utilitarian way, or, how many BCMs, how many deals, I mean, how is this? But I think the important thing is that for the first time, we have a mechanism that can be actionable, that it's, agreed, by the member states, and that paves the way, for a new thinking about the commodities that the EU would need for its economy and going forward for the green transition. I think it's very important to note that all the diminishing volumes of fossil fuels that we will need, but also the critical raw materials that we will need for the transition, they are not produced in Europe. We are not producers. We are heavy buyers. We are heavy consumers, but we don't produce these things. So it is important that we try, to do more together. And I think that again, this for me, is the political symbolism, which is very important of this move during the crisis. And then, discussions are existing, about extending it to other, let's say, other commodities beyond natural gas. And, something that, also the crisis showed is that we are not alone on this. I mean, you have countries like Japan as well that are heavy buyers of these commodities that need this for their for their future, economic development. And, ideas about, buyers club or bringing, a bit more clarity about, supply and demand in a global context, which is becoming more and more complex. I mean, we cannot take for granted, as we saw from the experience with the Russian natural gas, that the commodities will be sold to us just for economic reasons of price signal. So there, I think it is important that we continue to develop this visibility. Where are we going to get our commodities from? How to ensure a cheap and stable access to commodities? Because otherwise, I mean, the green transition is not going to be possible. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. And another question, perhaps, is there suggestions to that the EU may build green tech partnership? Is there any initiative on that topic or not?
By green tech, I mean, what do you mean in
green tech partnership with other countries to reduce the dependency of Europe from China in Europe?
Well, I mean, there are many. I mean, we continue to be a market economy, in the EU. So in a sense, I mean, we are not, let's say, segmenting the global market or applying different rules or so on. I mean, but there is a clear dialogue, with other heavy buyers in the world about, how to ensure that, we have a successful, green transition for everyone.
Okay. As we achieve the end of our panel today, may I ask you, to all of you, last question, and I will let each of you answer to that. What do you think? What may be the greatest challenges and the greatest threats we will have to face in the next 5 years concerning climate change, energy transition? Who want to answer first?
I'm okay to answer. Unfortunately, the biggest threat will not be that we do not know what to do. The biggest threat will not be that we are not cohesive enough or adaptative, innovative enough. The biggest threat is acceptance. We are a teeny European elite, not trusted by many people and rejected by many people. And it's extremely difficult to break this. And you have seen election after election, Sweden, Italy, half Spain, Slovakia, and we have Netherlands, and we have polls in Germany and France, that EV populism is there for a long time, and with the election next year at the parliament, it can block many actions, and then it can grow on its own inability to produce something useful. And this is extremely dangerous. And I see no way except either, and Camille, they have political ideas I do not have. I do not see how to respond to it.
And that threat is also a challenge for us, clearly. Miguel, Matoush, Heather?
I would just add
Yeah.
that there's a clear role for everybody in this. So we need political leadership to give very clear signals to the public and also to investors, to the private sector, that this transition is happening, that it's not going to, that there won't be going back to fossil fuels, that the energy transition is clearly moving forward, and that we're going to have a unified response across Europe. That's also extremely important. This isn't different member states doing different things, but everybody is moving towards renewables, some on different timetables, and of course the energy mix won't be exactly the same in each member state, but that very clear sense of direction is essential so that people make the right investments. They don't waste money on things that won't be valuable, that will become stranded assets. That's not only for companies, but also for households. You know, individuals who are buying internal combustion engine cars will find that they will become stranded assets. You know, these are major individual investments as well. So those very clear signals from political leaders. But then there are really vital roles for policymakers like Miguel in designing the right policies, for academics like Jean-Michel in explaining the consequences and working out some of the very gnarly, wicked problems around the energy transition and how to overcome them. And there's a huge role, I think, also for think tanks and experts like Matoush and Camille in really explaining what are the consequences and doing a lot of this, the public education. But I think it's very important that the public isn't just treated as receivers of information, but they're also a really important source of information, because they're the ones who know best how their own lives can adjust. And so this is why I think focus groups are of more value than polls in understanding the energy dilemmas that individuals and households are facing. And also these deliberative mechanisms are really key. And that's where local democracy is also important. We haven't talked much today about the role of cities and of local authorities, but actually a lot of the transition is happening at city level as cities change their transport policies. They introduce new public transport, for example, that gets more vehicles off the roads. Also where cities are the ones that are often addressing issues like district heating and how to reduce fossil fuel use in cities. So I think having that local government and use of things like the 100 Cities initiative, that the mission cities that the Commission has put forward, is really valuable and important. So I think there is actually a role for every one of us in changing the habits that we have accumulated over the past 2 centuries of the Industrial Revolution to a different energy system that will frankly serve our needs better and be fairer, as well as reducing not only emissions but also pollution.
Matoush.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief and I will try not to repeat anything. Miguelis would like
yes,
to...
can I just, because I will have to say
Miguel,
goodbye.
please.
I would have to say
Thank
goodbye.
you,
I have another meeting starting at 12, and I have already, the people here. No, so thank you very much. I think, just one point to finalize on my side. It is a lot about attracting private capital. We cannot expect the public sector to do all the investments. We can come, with the best regulation. We need to work more on the single market on our side, very clearly. But if we are not able to bring, all the private capital that is needed beyond renewables, on grids, on batteries, on storage, on, demand flexibility, is not going to be possible. And we are going to have very difficult next 10 years because, fossil fuels will still determine the majority of the hours of the electricity. Then we will have these dramatic effects for renewables, and we need to find the best way to survive the next 10 years, and then we will see a lot of benefits coming from the consumers. So thanks a lot, and apologies because I have
thank you very much, Miguel. Bye bye.
Thank you, Miguel.
Just very briefly, I think one of the most important thing, and maybe this is more about the Central and Eastern Europe, but I think it concerns also the whole EU, is energy efficiency, and not only energy efficiency as such, but the one that results in energy savings, because we need to save energy, and I will be now probably quoting Czech Ambassador for Energy Security, Mr. Bartuška, who is always saying that not used energy is the safest one. So if we will limit or save energy, I mean, the Commission came up with that, right? Or is very big proponent of that. If we will save energy, that's the energy that we don't need to deal with. So I think that that's the most important. So energy efficiency in itself is not so important, because then we can end up spending the same amount of energy for more things, right? So we need to save energy, or energy efficiency that results in less energy consumption. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Michel. Thank you, Matoush. Thank you, Eda, for participating to that panel. I will let you the last word to conclude the panel, Camille.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Again, thanks a lot for being here today and sharing your very interesting thoughts, and very much grateful to have had the chance to work with such outstanding reflection group members. It's been very interesting for me, and I hope also for the audience to hear you. And so we'll be, we'll remain available soon, and we'll have a launch event in Brussels on January 26th. So I hope to find as many of you as possible there. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much to all of us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And see you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Sylvie.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye, Camille. Many
Bye.
thanks to
Bye.
you.
Bye.